I thought finding out my wife was cheating on me was the worst thing that could happen to a man at 51. Then I discovered she'd been stealing from our family business for 18 months. But when my mother-in-law drove 4 hours from Nashville and knocked on my front door 3 months after the divorce papers were signed, holding a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Lorena's handwriting, that's when I finally understood how badly I'd misjudged everything. Lorena wasn't just a cheater and a thief. She was already dead. My name is Virgil. I run DOS Electrical Services out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I built it with my father, starting when I was 23. Just the two of us splitting overtime on jobs nobody else wanted. Residential rewires, panel upgrades, commercial work on the weekends. For years we hauled equipment in a rusted Ford pickup held together by habit and the understanding that complaining cost you time. By the time my father's hands gave out enough that he handed me the keys, we had 4 service trucks and 8 licensed electricians on payroll. We weren't big, but we were solid, built the right way, with our hands and our word. Lorena came into my life 12 years ago. She was working the front desk at my accountant's office. When I came in to dispute a quarterly filing, she caught the error in my records before I finished explaining. We had coffee that same afternoon. By the following spring, she was running our office full-time, billing, vendor payments, scheduling, all the paperwork I'd been drowning in. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. I handled the work in the field. She kept everything behind the desk in order. Between us, the whole operation ran the way it was supposed to. Della came along 7 years ago. My daughter is the reason I built anything worth keeping. I also had my son from my first marriage. Colton was 24 when all of this started, finishing his accounting degree at the University of Tennessee and talking seriously about joining the business once he graduated. Sharp kid. He had his mother's instincts for numbers and my stubbornness about getting things right. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. It was a Thursday evening in March when the first thing cracked. Lorena had sent me a text around 4 in the afternoon. Client meeting running late. Don't hold dinner. She'd been putting in longer hours for months by then. Said she was building out a freelance interior design side that she'd always wanted to pursue. She kept it separate from the office work. Said it was important to have something that was just hers. I understood that. I never questioned it. That evening I was finishing a service call near downtown, and on my way back across the river, I passed Henley's, the kind of restaurant with pressed tablecloths and lighting so low you can barely read the menu. Lorena's car was in the lot. I almost kept driving. Instead, I pulled to the curb and sat there. Something had been bothering me for weeks. Nothing I could name. Just small things adding up. The phone placed face down whenever I walked into the kitchen. The extra pause in the car before she came inside in the evenings. The way she laughed on certain calls and stopped laughing. The moment she heard my footstep in the hall. I went in and described my wife to the hostess and asked if she was seated. She pointed toward a corner booth. I could see Lorena through the glass partition, really laughing, the kind of easy, open laughter I hadn't heard, aimed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. The man across from her leaned forward and tucked a strand of hair back from her face. Slow. Familiar. The way you touch someone you know well, someone you've touched 100 times before. I stood in that lobby until the hostess asked if I was all right. I told her I was. I walked back to my truck and sat in the parking lot for the better part of an hour. By the time I drove home, Della was asleep. I went to bed without saying anything when Lorena came in, and I stared at the ceiling until dawn. The next morning, I wrote down the make and partial plate of the man's car. I did not confront Lorena. My father always said, measure twice before you cut. So I measured. It took a week through some calls with guys I'd known through the Contractors Association, but I got a name, Pierce Tolliver. Mid-40s. Lived in a high-rise apartment in the Old City neighborhood. Ran a one-man operation called Tolliver Strategic Group, a business consulting firm, supposedly. I searched online for an hour and found almost nothing. No reviews, no case studies, no presence that matched a real consulting practice. That second week was the hardest week of my adult life, and it wasn't even close to the worst of what was coming. I went to work every day, came home, helped Della with her spelling homework, sat across the dinner table from my wife, and made conversation about things that didn't matter, and felt the whole time like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my own body. It's a particular kind of exhaustion, holding that much still. Della broke through it one evening without trying to. She climbed up beside me on the couch while I was pretending to read and put her small hand on my arm. "Daddy, how come you don't whistle anymore?" I looked at her. "What? You always used to whistle." "In the morning, when you made breakfast. You haven't done it in a really long time." I didn't have anything to say to that. I put my arm around her and pulled her close, and she fell asleep against my shoulder while I stared at the wall. And right there, I made the only decision in this whole thing that I'm certain about. Whatever I found out, whatever this cost me, Della was going to come through it intact. She was the one fixed point. The money came next. I'd trusted Lorena with every aspect of the office side of things for a decade. That was the arrangement we'd built, the foundation of how we operated. But 3 weeks after the restaurant, with a referral from a colleague whose own divorce I'd watched close 2 years prior, I sat down at my desk and pulled 2 years of business bank statements before I called the attorney he'd recommended. What I found made my jaw tighten so hard. I had a headache for the rest of the afternoon. Payments to names I didn't recognize. Tolliver Strategic Group, footing $800 one month, $2,200 the next. Premium Office Solutions, LLC. Meridian Administrative Services. Each amount small enough, on its own, not to stand out in a monthly review. Together, over 18 months, it was just over $28,000. I called Colton that night and told him I needed his eyes on something. He drove down from campus the next morning with his laptop. We sat at the kitchen's table while Della was at school, and he went through every line of what I'd pulled. An hour in, he looked up at me. "2 of these companies don't exist. I ran them through the state business registry. Nothing. The third one has a registered agent, but zero activity. No employees, no filings, no phone number. It's a shell. How far back does it go?" He turned the screen toward me. 18 months that I can clearly document. Possibly a few months longer. Someone who understood the accounts set this up carefully. I looked at my son. He was working very hard to keep his face steady. "Is it her?" "I think so," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Dad, you need a lawyer." I already had one. My attorney was one of the top divorce litigators in Knox County, a woman in her mid-50s who had been practicing long enough to have seen every variation of this kind of thing and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She reviewed what Colton and I had compiled and didn't soften it. "This is embezzlement," she said, clear enough that a prosecutor would take it seriously. "Before we decide how to proceed, we need every piece of documentation you can lay hands on." She referred me to an investigator she worked with regularly, a man named Cobb, a former Knox County detective who now specialized in financial fraud connected to domestic cases. I met him at a coffee shop on Gay Street. He didn't waste words, which I appreciated. When I gave him Pierce Tolliver's name, he turned his coffee mug on the table for a moment without drinking from it. "I've come across that name before," he said. "Blount County, 2 years ago. A woman lost a catering business she'd built for 15 years. Before that, Chattanooga, a woman's husband discovered his wife had been diverting money to a consulting account. Tolliver was the consultant." He looked at me. "He has a pattern. He targets women with access to business finances, married to men who trust them with the books. He builds a relationship over a few months, then introduces the arrangement gradually. Small payments, easy to justify, then larger. He takes his cut and moves on when the risk increases." "How many women?" "4 that I can confirm with documentation. One lost her home when the restitution judgment came through. Another had a breakdown and lost custody of her children." He paused. "Your wife isn't the first person Pierce Tolliver has done this to, Mr. Doss." I sat with that. Part of me felt something complicated when he laid it out that way. Not sympathy, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Lorena had made her choices. She had kissed me goodbye every morning and signed off on transfers that drained money from the business we'd spent 12 years building together. That was on her. But the idea that she had been specifically selected specifically worked. That changed the shape of it slightly. The complication didn't last. I thought about Della on the couch, asking why I'd stopped whistling. And it didn't last at all. I also want to say plainly, I had a paternity test done, a home kit sent to a private lab. I needed to know. I'm not going to dress that up into something more complicated than it was. I simply needed to know. The results came back 10 days later. Della was mine. I sat in my own driveway after reading the results and let myself feel what that settled. A tight thing that had been wound up inside me for weeks, finally going slack. Whatever else was broken, that wasn't. I played the role of normal husband for almost 3 more weeks, while my attorney and Cobb built the case. Came home on time, made coffee in the morning, helped Della with her reading, sat across from Lorena at dinner, and asked about her day and listened to the answers. The whole time I was filing everything away. Every inconsistency. Every time her phone went face down when I walked into the room. Every evening, she claimed to be at a client consultation. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon. Della was at a birthday party across town. I had 4 hours. I spread everything on the kitchen table. The bank statements, the analysis Colton had put together, Cobb's photographs of Lorena and Pierce at restaurants, and a parking garage downtown, walking along the waterfront like they didn't have a concern in the world. When Lorena came in from the backyard and stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, and then at me, I knew she already understood. "How long?" I asked. She sat down at the table. She pressed her hands flat on the surface, the way a person does when they need something solid under them. "Almost 2 years. 2 years. Della had just turned 5 when it started. She told me she'd met Pierce at a business networking mixer downtown. That he'd come to her, said he could help her build the interior design work into something substantial. That it had started as something that looked like legitimate consulting. Small payments she'd run through the business account because it was simpler. And she told herself she'd sort it out later, clean it up, transfer it to personal funds. Then the amounts grew. Renfield Health Group. Then she was in something she didn't know how to name. And by the time she understood it clearly, she didn't know how to get out. "You could have come to me," I said. She didn't answer that. And in the silence I understood she hadn't come to me, because, at some point, she hadn't wanted to stop. We worked out the terms through attorneys over the following 5 weeks. Lorena surrendered all claims to DOS Electrical. She accepted a supervised visitation schedule, 2 weekends a month, reviewed at the 6-month mark. In exchange, I did not pursue criminal charges for the embezzlement, on the condition of a signed restitution agreement. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late July. I signed the papers in my attorney's office and drove to pick up Della from her summer program and took her for ice cream and listened to her tell me about the relay races they'd run that afternoon. And I was present for every single word. The first 2 months afterward were quiet, the way a place gets quiet after a storm moves through. Della and I moved into a smaller house in the Bearden neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. No history in the walls, no weight in the rooms. Colton came on full-time with the business and brought ideas about bidding commercial contracts, hospital projects, multifamily housing, work that could take DOS Electrical somewhere my father and I had never reached. Lorena missed her first scheduled visit with Della in late September. Didn't call, didn't send a message through her attorney, nothing. I assumed she was somewhere with Pierce, and felt a specific kind of bitterness about it that I kept well away from Della. The second scheduled visit in October came and went the same way. I left a message with her attorney. Got no response. I told myself she'd made her priorities clear, that she was an adult who had chosen a man over her daughter, and there was nothing more to understand about it. That bitterness made a kind of sense I could live with. Then my mother-in-law knocked on my door. It was a Wednesday evening in late October, just after 7. I looked through the side window and almost didn't recognize her. I hadn't seen her since a family gathering before everything broke open, and she looked years older than that. She was standing on my porch holding a manila envelope against her chest with both hands. The way you carry something you're not entirely sure you should be carrying. "She's gone," my mother-in-law said when I opened the door. "Lorena's been missing for 3 weeks. The police say she's an adult who left voluntarily." But something is wrong. She would not just leave Della. She wouldn't. I brought her inside, made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. She slid the envelope toward me. She gave me this before she disappeared. Told me to give it to you if anything happened to her. I held on to it because I kept waiting for her to walk back through my door. She hasn't. I opened it. 4 handwritten pages in Lorena's handwriting. A stack of printed text message screenshots. Photographs I had to look away from once before I could make myself look again. The letter began with an apology, and then it became something else entirely. She wrote that Pierce had not simply been her lover and her consultant. From almost the beginning, she wrote, he had been something she didn't have a clean word for. A controller. The embezzlement hadn't originated with her. She was clear about that, and the timeline she laid out matched what Cobb had found about his previous victims. He'd suggested the arrangement after 2 months of what she believed was a genuine relationship. Small payments first, structured to look like real consulting fees. Then larger. And by the time she understood what was actually happening, he had digital records of her authorizing every single transfer. He told her that if she stopped, or told me, he would send those authorizations to the DA himself and make certain she went to prison. He told her that if she went to the police, something would happen to Della. Not to me, to Della. She wrote, I know how all of this looks. I know that what I did was wrong and that I hurt you, and that I hurt our daughter. But I need you to understand that after a certain point, I was not staying because I wanted to. Every time I tried to pull back from the arrangement, he found a way to remind me what he was capable of. I was terrified of him, Virgil. I should have come to you immediately. I should have trusted that we could face it together. I was ashamed, and I was afraid, and I kept choosing wrong. Please believe me when I tell you I knew it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. The last page was in tighter, smaller handwriting, like she'd been pressed for time. After the divorce was final, I decided I was done. I found an attorney on my own, not involved in our case, and I was going to give her everything. The texts, the financial records, his history with the other women, all of it. He found out. I don't know how. He called me and told me that if I took one more step toward exposing him, he would find a way to get to Della. I decided the only thing I could do was lead him away from Knoxville. Away from both of you. If you're reading this, something went wrong. Please don't let Della grow up believing her mother was only a thief and a liar. I love that little girl more than I have ever loved anything in my life. Keep her safe. That's all I'm asking. Keep her safe. The photographs were of bruising along her ribs and upper arm. The screenshots were threatening text messages from a number that Cobb traced back to Pierce Tolliver within 48 hours. My mother-in-law and I sat at that table for a long time without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, she was trying to protect your daughter. I called Cobb the following morning. He had already been quietly maintaining contact with a detective in the Knox County Sheriff's Office, who had kept a passive file on Pierce Tolliver for close to 2 years, waiting for enough to act on. We brought him everything. Lorena's letter, the photographs, the screenshots, Cobb's documentation from the Blount County and Chattanooga cases, my own records from the divorce. It was, by that point, more than enough. Lorena's car was located 11 days later in long-term parking outside Chattanooga. Her body was recovered from the Tennessee River 2 days after that. The medical examiner's report did not support an accidental drowning. The bruising pattern, the evidence of a physical struggle, none of it was consistent with someone who had gone into that water on their own. The investigation took 4 months. Cobb worked across 2 counties, coordinating with investigators who had been building a case on similar fraud schemes and needed exactly this kind of anchor. Pierce Tolliver was taken into custody at a hotel in Atlanta, where he'd been living under a different name. He was brought back to Tennessee and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of extortion, and financial fraud that crossed 3 state lines. I testified at the trial. 2 of his earlier victims testified. My mother-in-law testified, describing the envelope, the timeline, the day Lorena had pressed it into her hands and asked her to keep it safe. Lorena's letter was entered into evidence and read aloud in the courtroom. I sat in the gallery and listened to her words in a stranger's voice, and I thought about a woman who had made one very bad choice, and then spent a long time trying to undo the damage of it, and who had run out of road before she got there. Pierce Tolliver was convicted on all counts. Life without parole for the murder. The fraud and extortion sentences stacked on top of that. I called Colton from the courthouse parking lot after the verdict. He didn't say much, neither did I. We stayed on the phone anyway, just the two of us, for a few minutes. The part that doesn't end with a verdict is Della. She was 7 by then. Old enough to know. Her mother had stopped showing up. Old enough to ask the kinds of questions a child asks when they are trying to sort out something that adults haven't sorted out themselves yet. I told her the truth in pieces, sized to what I thought she could carry at any given moment. Her mother had made some serious mistakes. Her mother had gotten into a situation with someone dangerous. Her mother had tried at the end to protect us. She wasn't coming home. Did she love me? Della asked one evening while I was tucking her in. Yes, I said completely, without any doubt. She thought about that, with the careful seriousness that she brings to most things. Did she love you? I took a moment with that one. I think she did, in her way. She made choices that hurt both of us, but I think she did. Della nodded, filing it away. Then can we visit her sometime? My mother-in-law had arranged for Lorena to be buried in Nashville, in the family plot where her own parents were. The three of us drove out on a Saturday in March. Della, my mother-in-law, and me. Della had picked out a bunch of yellow tulips from the grocery store herself, turning them over in her hands the whole drive, making sure none of them bent. She set them down at the base of the headstone and stood there for a long moment with her hands clasped in front of her, looking at her mother's name in the stone. Do you think she can see us? She asked. I think so, my mother-in-law said softly. Della considered this with complete seriousness. Then she raised one hand in a small, careful wave. Not a big gesture, just a wave. The kind you give someone across a room when you're not sure if they can see you, but you want them to know you're there. That is the image I keep. Not the restaurant window. Not the bank statements spread across the kitchen table. Not the courtroom. My daughter, in a Tennessee cemetery in March, waving at a headstone because she didn't want her mother to wonder if she'd been forgotten. Colton and I renamed the business that spring. Doss & Son Electrical. My father drove up for the sign installation and stood squinting at it in the afternoon light with his hands in the pockets of his work coat. Your grandfather would have liked that, he said. My mother-in-law comes to visit once or twice a month now. She brings Della small things. A photograph, a scarf that had been Lorena's, a bracelet that Lorena had bought when Della was born and kept in a drawer. She is building something careful and patient with my daughter, a thread back to a woman who made terrible choices, and one very brave one at the end. I have not tried to cut that thread. It isn't mine to cut. I understand now that I had been living alongside a version of my wife that wasn't complete. Not because I was blind. Because she was afraid to show me the rest of it. And then she was too ashamed. And then she was trapped, and by the time she found her way towards something like courage, there wasn't enough time left. I don't know what I would have done differently if she had come to me at the beginning. I want to believe I would have helped her. I want to believe we could have faced Pierce Tolliver together. And she wouldn't have had to make that drive to Chattanooga alone. But I can't know that. I only know what happened and what didn't. What I do know is this. A Thursday morning, May, I woke before the alarm, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the early light come up over the ridge, the way it does in spring, the whole valley going from gray to green in the space of about 15 minutes. Della came in, around 7, in her socks, poured herself orange juice, and climbed up on the counter stool to wait for breakfast. Somewhere between cracking the eggs and setting the pan on the burner, I started whistling, a quiet, half-conscious thing. One of those old tunes my father used to hum while he worked. Della looked up from her juice. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't need an explanation. Some things you have to rebuild from nothing. Others were never really gone. Others were never really gone. Just quiet, waiting for the right conditions to surface again. Living through what I lived through taught me that those two things are not as different as they seem. You keep showing up. You keep choosing the honest thing, even when the honest thing is hard, and the easy thing is right there. You build something worth leaving behind, and you let that be enough. And some mornings, not every morning, but some, it is.